Welcome to the John Freakin' Muir Pod. Lace up those boots and sling on the pack for a romp through trails, short and long. With your host and Renaissance man, Doc. It's time to embrace the suck.
Welcome back to another week on the trail. I'm Doc, and this is the John Freakin' Muir Pod. Let's start off with the obligatory reminder. If you are enjoying the podcast, take just a minute, help us out, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're not enjoying the pod, well, just go ahead and keep that to yourself. All right, let's get to this week's guest. Well, some of our faithful listeners out there have heard about this week's guest before. If you remember my chat with Pepe Le Pew, a.k.a. Jose Zambrano, he told the story about a guy he met on the trail that had a wild story about a lightning strike. Through a happy coincidence, I was able to connect with that guy. Welcome to the John Freakin' Muir Pod, Grant Breidenbach.
Thank you so much for having me. Really, really great to be on this evening.
Do you remember that conversation with Pepe Le Pew?
I do. You know, he reached out to me actually about, I think right after he had recorded it. And I don't think he quite mentioned that I was going to be on the show, but I thought I kind of might know that I might be on. And sure enough, I saw the episode come out and he mentioned me and I was like, wow, that's really cool. I ran into him just on the north side of Donahue Pass, and we had just this really, really brief interaction, but we all were like absolutely freaked out about the weather. And I think that just like this instant bonding moment, and we just quickly traded social media information, and we wouldn't be chatting here today if it wasn't for that. So I'm just super stoked about that.
Fantastic. And we're not going to get into the story yet. We're going to save that as kind of a teaser for the, later in the episodes. You have to
weather. That's the teaser.
That's right. You have to listen in and find out about this bizarre, just fantastic, crazy, scary lightning strike issue. So stay tuned for that. All right. Hey, Grant, do you have a trail name? Because that's what we go by here on the podcast. We
Absolutely.
go by trail names.
Yeah.
I'm Doc. What's your trail name?
My trail name's Detour.
Detour. Oh, I love it. And of course, we have to hear the story behind the trail name. How'd you end up with Detour?
Yeah. So I was coming over. Well, actually, it was the day after meeting Pepe Le Pew, and I was coming over Donahue Pass, and I ran into this couple, Maddie and Leo. And just kind of, you know how it is, you kind of run into people a few times throughout a day and you kind of keep crisscrossing. And I was just like really positive, and I was telling them a little about my plan. And just that very day, only having known them a little bit, they're like, "You're a Detour." And the reason they called me Detour was I did the whole John Muir Trail, but I think there's a couple specific spots, and we could talk about this, where I think the trail takes kind of a stupid route. And I think with a slight detour, you can have a lot more fun and take a little bit better route. I think the Forest Service did a great job of planning the route for most of it, but there's a couple spots, especially in the northern section of the trail, where I think you can really add on to it. So actually, over the whole course of it, with resupplies and from the top of Whitney down, I did actually just about 250 miles instead of 211. So because of that, they called me Detour, and they're always, everyone kind of made the most of that.
Well, that's great. And you know what? I want to get right down to it right now about the stupid route. I want to hear it. I haven't heard this before from anybody else saying, "Hey, you know what? That part of the trail, that's just ridiculous. It should have gone this way." So I'm dying to hear, what your detour is, what your recommended detour is.
So I've got two key detours I'll share with you.
Okay.
First one, and I think this is an obvious one that a lot of people do, but it's Clouds Rest. The main John Muir Trail section there, burned about a decade ago or so now. I can't remember exactly how long. But it just kind of goes through this. It's a lovely valley, don't get me wrong, but without that much extra effort, you can go up to Clouds Rest, and you basically go up to Clouds Rest, then come down through the Sunrise Lakes, and then pop out right near the Sunrise Lakes High Sierra camp, and then you just pop out in this beautiful meadow kind of near the Cathedral Peaks and Cathedral Lake. We head up Tuolumne through there, and there's probably about a 10-mile section of the trail that you never do. So maybe there's some purists out there that say, "Oh, we didn't like the John Muir Trail," but like your own hike, and I think it's a great section. I think that one specifically adds maybe 7 or 8 miles. I can't remember. I'd have to look at all the numbers. The second detour I think is even better and is a little bit less known. Some people take a little bit out and back detour and will kind of hike up towards some of the lakes just before you get to Red's Meadow, which are kind of some of those minaret lakes. You see a lot of people go up to like Azida Lake or Iceberg Lake. Mm-hmm. Well, the beauty of it is you can actually continue up to Cecil Lake. It's kind of this steep, it's kind of a second class-ish kind of scree trail up, but you continue up to Cecil Lake and then you either camp at Cecil Lake or just continue through. I camped at Cecil Lake, probably one of the best campsites of the entire trip. I mean, mind-blowing. It also was way less people. There were just a couple of rock climbers up there and people on kind of some like weekend trips. It was around the 4th of July coming out of Red's Meadow. And then you drop down into Minaret Lake and then you pick up the trail right near like Johnson Lake, Minaret Falls area. And so you end up not, seeing Rosalie Lake or Shadow Lake. You do cut those off, but, you're just kind of underneath that big, kind of volcanic ridge for most of that, kind of down in that low elevation valley, one of the lowest areas, outside of Yosemite Valley, kind of down in the headwaters. If I believe that's the San Joaquin. But instead you get to go through the Minarets, which like is this incredible landscape that's very much, what the John Muir Trail is about, kind of over these passes and at the base of mountains. And so it adds, I think, close to 15 miles. I can't remember, but it adds a bit. It really a budget an extra day for this, but you go through some of the most spectacular scenery doing it. And it's a little bit I'd easily say it's some of the most technical, hiking on the trail, because everything else is graded for stock. And even Forester Pass, you can take your little horse and pony up there if you want. But you would be very hard pressed to get some livestock up to Cecil Lake and whatnot. So that was a real highlight for me, and a great detour. So those are two that I'll share.
Hey, you've convinced me. That sounds amazing. Tell me, you said that the Cecil Lake was one of the best campsites on the trail. What in your mind makes for a fantastic campsite? Tell me some of the qualities of Cecil Lake.
I'm definitely somebody that needs a view and near-ish the water. I'm all for, camping at the right distance from the water, but I like to look out over the lake. Now you got to look hard to find camps at the Cecil Lake. There's only a handful down near, it's really at the back of the lake. It looks like it might be the outlet, and it looks like maybe historically, like in geologic time, it maybe at one point is the outlet from the lake. But it's really the southeast side of the lake, kind of on the back there. There's a couple small campsites. You're not going to get your family 4-person tent in there. Like you're going to get your little 1-person bivy tent, or maybe, I actually camped with a 2-person tent. It was this REI tent that is their flashier too. And the weight difference between the 1-person and the 2-person was so negligible that it was awesome with the 2-person. And with the weather, as we'll get into, was like a total godsend. I was able to get the little 2-person tent up there, and it's kind of up on this high point. You look out over the lake, and you're right at the base of the minarets, because the minarets are something you see usually from a distance, right? And they look awesome, but it's a whole nother story being right at the base of them and just like being kind of in awe of them, and they're just all encompassing around you. I mean, so it's just like this total like awe-inspired view. And the next morning I woke up at Cecil Lake, and you can see rock climbers up there on one of the minarets, and you get to just sit there and enjoy that. And where else on the trail do you get to enjoy that? So relatively level ground, relatively easy access to water, but number one for me is the view.
Okay. And you mentioned you went through a lot right there, and I want to touch on a couple of things.
Totally.
We are going to get to some gear discussion, and we will talk about the weather a little bit later on. But I love the phrase that you dropped in there, geologic time, because I'm going to get deep right here. So I think that's part of the allure of the great outdoors, and especially the Sierras,
Yes.
it kind of puts things in perspective, right? I mean, these vistas, these incredible landscapes were created over the course of, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And you talk about geologic time, and we are just an eye blink in the space of geologic time. And so when you're out there, you kind of feel that immensity, you feel that vastness, and it kind of puts things into perspective.
Yeah, you just feel you feel so small. You're a visitor. Really in a geologic perspective, you're just a speck of dust, so to speak. You will come and you will go, but those mountains are going to endure. They're going to stand the test of time. But at the same time, ultimately they are changing. Something I'll touch on is on my last day, I actually experienced a gigantic rock slide. So it's this weird paradox, because on one hand, they're so static from our human perspective, but at the same time, they are constantly changing at every moment, every freeze and every thaw and every drop of rain and every gust of wind. The mountains are fundamentally changing, and everyone gets a slightly different perspective, though uniquely tied, and we all kind of share that common experience.
Yeah, well said. And then the other, you're talking about being at the foot of the minarets and what a vista that is. And I had a guest on previously who I think summed it up perfectly, and my listeners have heard this before, so just bear with me. I'm going to share this with Detour. Jay Wilson talked about showing pictures to people who haven't been on the trail, and you're trying to convey to them how awesome, how magnificent it is out there, and you show them a picture and they say, "Oh yeah, that's nice," and you just want to shake them. It's not nice. It is life-changing.
Yes.
And Jay summed it up perfectly. He said that is the curse of 1,000-word pictures, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is the curse of 1,000-word pictures when you are in million-word locations.
How about that? Yeah,
does not come across. Does not do it justice.
No, it does not. And boy, Cecil Lake is a million-word location. I mean, the whole John Muir Trail, of course, is a billion-word trail, but
I like
Cecil
that.
Lake especially.
I'm gonna use that detour.
All right.
I'm gonna use that in
you
future episodes.
Take that one.
Billion-word trail.
Write that one down.
Yes. All right. Hey, Detour, have you listened to the podcast before?
I was really not a listener until Pepe Le Pew told me about it. I'm new to the podcast.
Okay. So I only asked, not to put you on the spot or anything, I just want to make sure that you are familiar with some different segments that we do.
Okay.
The most important I want to give you a heads up on is the Pro Tip Insight of the Week. And that is a segment towards the end of the episode where I'm going to turn to you. I'm going to say, Detour, what is your Pro Tip Insight of the Week? What little nugget of wisdom can you share with our listeners to make their next outdoor experience even better? So don't be surprised. Think about that. Sometimes you'll get an idea through the natural flow of conversation here.
All right. Good to know.
Okay, good. Hey, another feature we've been doing this season is the Must Bring Gear Review, sponsored by the ultralight backpacking gear company, Outdoor Vitals. And here's how it works. If you were to let a stranger pack your bag with pretty much generic gear for a multi-day hike, what is the one specific piece of gear you would insist on being packed? And if you've got a particular brand for that specific piece of gear, even better. So Detour, what is your must-bring piece of gear out there?
Absolutely. So for me, that is my Bear Vault. Bear Vault is really central to my packing. I think a lot of people look at their bear canister as something that's of a burden, something that's extra that, I've got my base weight and the bear canister on top of this, right? And sometimes you'll even see that physically, right? They'll put their bear canister on top of their pack, and sometimes there are packs that just flat out are tiny. People are trying to really go for some really efficient base weights. But I think the bear canister is really integral to the experience, and it's at the heart of it. If you're going to go out in the wilderness, and you're really going to enjoy that wilderness experience, and you want it to maintain as a wilderness experience, not just for you and for your personal safety, but for all of those who are going to follow you, I think a bear canister is absolutely crucial. It's not just also for bear territory. There's a lot of wild animals that really want to get after your food, and so whether it's a mouse on the Appalachian Trail that wants to eat your goodies, and you're going to be hungry or maybe get a sickness or disease, having proper food storage can put a stop to that. And it's larger, too. I think experiencing bears is one of the most magical things on something like the Glacier Trail. I'm sure a lot of your guests, when they talk about their top 5 moments, I'm sure bears is something that just consistently comes up, right? Top 5 moment, bear. What would you say? Probably 20%, 30% of people say that is the bears in their top 5 moments.
There's a lot of conversation about bear.
A lot of conversation about bear. Exactly.
That's right. And so I tell people, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You have to be faster than your hiking partner. Sweep the leg.
Unless you're hiking solo.
That's right. Sweep the leg and then head on out. Yeah.
What if you're hiking solo?
Well, then you have to be faster than the bear. Yeah.
Then you need a bear canister.
Yeah. And you mentioned it's not just for bears. It's also, you mentioned mice, and there's also a lot of very plump marmots on the John Muir Trail. So.
Yeah. And, those marmots, a lot of rodents, including in the Sierra, can carry hantavirus, which is a pretty nasty disease that I would prefer not to get, and also just, experiencing, I think experiencing a mammal that large, a bear is a really magical experience. And, ultimately, I think we have a responsibility to kind of preserve that experience. It's kind of part of the holistic experience of going on the John Muir Trail is that you might get to experience a bear. And the reality of it is with the growth and the popularity of the trail, both from people, on the John Muir Trail itself, as well as other, kind of weekend or week-long segments, with the explosive growth of traffic, despite the permitting, the wildlife are really, really under a lot of pressure. And it's our responsibility to protect that wildlife. And it really starts with proper bear-resistant food storage. Bears won't learn that humans are a source of food, and it fundamentally changes the reaction. There's a wildlife photographer by the name of Tahoe Toogie. He's this guy up in the Tahoe area, and he does a ton with basically like remote sensor cameras. And you see that bears, when they're in their natural habitat, not around people at all, they're just these totally different creatures. And you hear these experiences of bears being, honestly, sometimes downright scary and aggressive around folks, both on the John Muir Trail and whatnot. And that's really not black bear's natural demeanor. And that's something that has really increased as a result of the pressure and bears getting a taste of human food. So it's something that we can do to really help out the wildlife. And so for me, a bear canister, specifically a bear vault, is really at the center of my packing.
Yes, agreed. I had a former guest on, goes by the name of Ape Man. And
Ape Man.
He's a longtime hiker, I don't know how many decades in the Sierras and in Yosemite. And he talks about the early days where they did not have bear canisters and they have to, hang their food. And what would happen is that bears, when they become accustomed to food, and they become, more aggressive towards getting that food, and the rangers in Yosemite or animal control would have to relocate those bears. That would be the first step, to relocate them. And they'd relocate them to like a lesser trafficked area up in northern Yosemite. And Ape Man and his buddies would go camp up in upper Yosemite, northern Yosemite, and would have to spend their nights, fending off the bears, throwing rocks and trying to scare them away. And it's pretty antsy moments there. I mean, didn't know what was going to happen. And so, the worst thing that could happen is that a bear becomes accustomed to eating human food and living off of humans and bothering humans. And then that bear has to be put down. So, So important to carry a bear canister and take care of your food properly.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was talking to my friend Marin, who was at the Clouds Rest Junction, and I'm not exactly sure. I don't think she was at Lilius Yosemite Valley. I'm not 100% sure where in that area she was camped, but somewhere near the Clouds Rest Junction. And she had a bear approach her and her husband. And the bear was incredibly aggressive, got its teeth on the bear canister, and the bear vault did its job, withstood the bear, and they were eventually able to scare the bear off. There was all sorts of slobber and scratch marks on the canister. But that bear, clearly knew that was a way to get to food. And, I really wonder, by the end of summer, was there somebody that, say, didn't close their canister, had the lid open perhaps, and,
Right.
There's even a chance that bear is not around anymore, so it's, I think really the time is now, and we all really have a collective responsibility there.
Yep.
Something I saw along the trail this summer was, something that was different to me, especially too, is there's a lot of ranger stations along the John Muir Trail, these little backcountry stations, especially once you get into, like, say, Kings Canyon National Park, but even throughout the trail. And I do not think there was a single ranger station that I passed by that did not have a handwritten note from the ranger this summer that, had something along the lines of active, bold, aggressive, bear in the area, that's really going after, campers' food, and potentially even the campers themselves. And, be on the alert, hanging food does not work. You need an approved bear canister in this area. And, it's ubiquitous. It's throughout the entire trail. And so that was something that really caught me off guard too.
Yeah, I remember seeing those same notices this summer. It was not encouraging. I don't want to say depressing, but it's a sign that something's not quite right out there. That people they're getting access to food and becoming more aggressive. So that's not good for people, and it's not good for bears. So
no, not at all.
People do what you're supposed to do out there.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, let's go back to gear for a second. I want to talk about your kit and what you used out there on the trail.
Definitely.
Let's start off with your base weight. You know what your base weight was?
Definitely. So before any food and water, I was actually right at 21 pounds. That includes bear canister and everything. So not the lightest person out there. Easily the heaviest item I actually had was my backpack, which was my Osprey Aether AG60, which comes in almost at a whopping 5 pounds. But I couldn't be happier. It's like the most comfortable pack ever built, and it's like all heat molded to my hips and everything. And it was awesome. And there were a couple other things that people told me, like, oh, you got to get rid of. Like, I had a proper dry treated pack cover, and somebody was like, oh, come on, like, you got to just line your pack with a trash bag. And as we'll get to weather, I am so glad that I had a proper pack cover that that went over my entire pack. That was a total game changer.
Nice. And we heard about your tent, 2-person REI tent.
Yep.
How about what's your sleeping system? You use a sleeping bag or a quilt?
Yep. So I had the REI Magma 15, comes in at 28.2 ounces. And that tent is an incredible 36 ounces for a 2-person tent, which was just, mind blowing really to me. Especially for, I think my perspective on REI gear before really getting this was like, oh, REI stuff is a cottage manufacturer. It's going to be pretty heavy and not the right option for me. But I was pleasantly surprised with both the Magma 15 and the Flash Air 2 tent.
Now, you and I, we had an opposite approach this past summer. I actually went with a bivvy, very low profile. And in terms, when you're in bad weather, a bivvy is not the right choice because you're confined to a very small space, and it's just kind of depressing. And so I actually came back from that trip, and I worked with my sponsor, Outdoor Vitals, and they actually sent me a tent to try out on my next trip. So I'm really looking forward to getting back into a tent and having
definitely
a little bit more room in there.
Yep. When you're kind of hunkering down, there's nothing like having a little bit of space to spread out. Now I will say, with a larger tent, more fabric, when it gets wet, it is heavier too. If you've got a bivvy soaking wet, a soaking wet bivvy weighs less than a soaking wet 2-person tent. So there is that.
That's true. There is trade-off because, I was looking at weight, trying to get down to a very, very low base weight. I'm not drilling holes in my toothbrush yet, but I was trying to find ways to save weight. And so I was going with not a tarp. I was going with a bivvy and a quilt. And I like the quilt. The quilt's awesome, but I think I'm going to gladly carry another pound or so and have a tent on hand to maybe spread out a little bit.
Yep. I did break my toothbrush in half to save a couple grams.
Well, with a base weight of 21 pounds, that toothbrush, breaking that in half, that's important.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Hey, let's back up a little bit. I want to go back to your origin story here with outdoor adventure. I want to hear about your background, where you grew up, what kinds of sports and hobbies were you involved in, and how did you get involved with the thru hiking cult? Which thru hiking is a cult. It's a group think that convinces you to live in the dirt for days on end. So that's got to be a cult.
Yep. There's an Instagram page that I think also calls it a syndicate, like it's some sort of mafia kind of. It's either a cult or a syndicate or something. But I hated the outdoors, honestly. Like I was growing up, my parents would drag me out to maybe Glacier National Park or something. And I would say, who in their right mind would want to go on a hike? We're going to go up to some alpine lake. That sounds cold and miserable. And like, my feet are going to hurt. Can't we just I don't know, take a trip to the city, And I was not about it. It was not really my speed.
So did you grow up in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah. In Boise, Idaho.
Okay. All right.
So a lot of, phenomenal access to the outdoors, went a lot of great places. In hindsight, were incredible. I hear, all these trips to Yellowstone and to Glacier and all sorts of state parks. And, and I look back and I'm like, God, why did you have such a negative attitude? Those were really great places.
Right. And were you an only child?
I have an older brother, about 4 years older, and he had a much more positive outlook than me for some reason, except now I'm far more outdoorsy than he is, and I can't quite put two and two together.
It's funny how that works out sometimes.
Yeah.
And so was it car camping that you did, or was it actually hiking
never
in
backpacking?
Okay.
Probably because my parents knew I would just complain too much and it'd be a miserable experience. So car camping was all they could make work.
Mm-hmm.
But it was. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. You finish, and then I'll hold my comment.
I was just going to say that it was not until high school really that I started to kind of ride some mountain bikes, and I got into photography. And with photography, I was able to go out into nature, and like cliche as it may be, it was quite literally a new lens on the outdoors, and it was an opportunity to really try to capture and frame the beauty. And I started to look at the way the light would play across the hills or through a landscape, and I suddenly started to realize, like, holy cow, there's a lot of ways to like experience and explore this, as well as like really recognize an inherent beauty to this that I don't think I fully recognized and understood. And it just like took off for me from there.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you said that, because that kind of was my next question was, I'm always fascinated with the moment that somebody realizes that thru hiking is a thing. And, when I talk to the long trailers, I like to hear about when they first realize that there's such a thing as a trail from Mexico to Canada, and you can just actually walk that. And, through the process of incremental progress, you're able to complete that. So, I mean, when did you realize that thru hiking was a thing? I'll give you an example from my own experience. Is I'm in education, and when I was working at a high school, I was talking to one of our football coaches who was a junior high school teacher at the neighboring junior high, and found out that he was section hiking the PCT, that he would just go out for weeks on end in the summer and would hike for hundreds of miles. And I thought, what in the world? I have never heard of such a thing. Who would even consider doing this? I mean, why would you do this? And so that was my first realization that such a thing existed, through hiking and the long trail. When did you realize? Well, do you remember that moment when you realized that thru hiking was a thing?
I think I couldn't quite put a time on knowing exactly like when I knew it was kind of a thing, but it always really seemed out there. I think I think the PCT kind of pops up in popular culture a little bit. And I think I kind of knew like a friend of a friend whose dad had maybe done like the Washington section of the PCT, but I don't really know if I knew what that meant. The first time that I think it really seemed real to me was in the Wind River Range, kind of in the Green River Lakes. I came across a few northbound CDTers, and sure enough, I was like, "Holy cow, that's out there!" Like that's, here I am with my heavy pack, and I was like, "Oh my goodness!" I was carrying everything for our entire group. I swear, I had like 35, 40-pound pack. And I thought it was pretty light, at the time. And here I come across these folks, that look like they're practically day hiking, like just a little bit bigger than what seems like a day hike pack to me. But, they're like layers of filth and grit and grime. And I'm like, that's legit. Look at that. And that kind of got me thinking. And that's honestly the moment that also inspired me to do John Muir Trail, because I certainly wasn't ready to go off and hike the CDT or the PCT, but I was ready to try something a little bigger. And so I think seeing those CDTers in the Wind River Range was what inspired me to do the John Muir Trail.
Fantastic. And I can't wait to hear more about the Wind River Range. I've heard others talk about it. I want to get your perspective on it.
Definitely.
Before we go to a quick break here, how do you pay the bills these days? How do you fund your adventures? What do you do for a living?
Definitely. I work in the outdoor industry. So I'm up here in Boulder County, Colorado. Just after I finished the John Muir Trail, I packed up my bags, zipped to Boise, packed up my whole life, moved to Colorado, and within a week of getting off the John Muir Trail, I was working for Bear Vault, who makes the bear-resistant food containers for backpackers. So I work in marketing. I do a lot with social media, web development, you name it, that's under the sun for marketing. And I'm probably working on it at Bear Vault.
Nice. Now we know exactly why you specified Bear Vault when you were talking about bear canisters in your earlier story.
Hey, it's the best one. Even if I didn't work for Bear Vault, it was the bear canister I owned before I had this job with Bear Vault. I really attest to that it's the most versatile product, and it's the best one on the market.
Mm-hmm. Do they want to sponsor a podcast?
Hey, I can look into it.
Okay, very good. And I also want to point out to our listeners who may not be watching this on YouTube that Detour has behind him in his home in Colorado. He's got a John Muir Wilderness Sierra National Forest wooden sign hanging on his wall. Did you take that off one of the trail signs, or is that custom made?
Oh, that's actually my base weight. I took the whole sign there. Yeah. No, I got back and I looked on Etsy, and there's a couple artists that'll put them together, and I thought it'd be, some people do tattoos, and I was like, maybe a tattoo, but probably not. My family would kill me. So I was like, you know what? I'll fork over some cash and have this sign custom made, and it's just great hanging up in my room.
It looks pretty authentic. And you reminded me, I have a lot of people ask me, family members ask, aren't you afraid someone's going to steal something out there from you? And I'm like, no, that would just add to their weight. They don't want to carry anything extra. Are you kidding me?
It's true.
All right. Hey, stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to hear about some hiking experiences out there. And I promise you, we will get to the weather stories. Hang on for that. We'll be right back. The John freaking Muir Pod is sponsored by Outdoor Vitals, the ultralight backpacking gear company whose mission is to improve the mental, physical, and emotional health of mankind by facilitating impactful outdoor experiences. Outdoor Vitals creates innovative technical products with confidence-inspiring education that empower outdoor ultralight adventurers. Their focus on performance enables you to live ultralight with gear you can actually be confident with. Whether you're looking for an ultralight sleep system, shelter, or pack, or if you're looking for top quality apparel for the trail, you can find it at Outdoor Vitals. Do yourself a favor. Live ultra light. And welcome back. We are talking to Detour. We got a little sense of his background and growing up and how he pays the bills with Bear Vault. And now we're going to talk about some of his hiking experiences. So, when you grew up in Idaho, a lot of hiking opportunities in Idaho. Is that where it all started?
Definitely. So I was in freshman year of college, and a couple friends got together. There were a couple friends that had already gone backpacking previously, and they're like, we should go on a little backpacking trip here into the Sawtooth Wilderness in Idaho. And so I went down to the outdoor recreation program on campus at the university, and they've got really cool gear rental, for something ridiculous like $5, got this ludicrous 80-liter pack, and and I think I even hammock camped, and I don't know, it was kind of all over the place and way overpacked, and didn't really have the right gear, but got out into the Sawtooth, and I was like, okay, this is really cool.
Hey, Detour, so the danger of having an 80-liter pack is the urge to fill that 80-liter pack.
And I filled it.
I've got room. I've got more room. I'm going to fill this thing up. And then it weighs a ton.
Oh yeah. I think I had a shirt for every single day. I had underwear for every single day. Probably had a jacket for every single day. Heck, probably a sleeping bag for every single day. It was absolutely ludicrous, really. But we went up into this area of the Sawtooths, and it was mind blowing. Just being out there, doing with a lot less than car camping, and just not having self-service, being around friends, and building those relationships. It really kind of lit a fire for me. And then I spent a lot of time in the Sawtooths. I probably spent the most miles on the John Muir Trail, but in all my hikes in the Sawtooths is probably where I've racked up the second most miles. Just constantly, it's only about 2.5 hours from Boise, and none of the approaches are too bad. You can drive up to a trailhead, and after about a mile, you're pretty much in kind of the subalpine, and then tree line after maybe 2 miles, and maybe even the alpine by the 3rd mile. So you can it's really accessible. And even, it was kind of where I really learned a lot of compass navigation skills and kind of trip planning, and found this really old website about these guys back in the 80s that had started in this old mining town way on the backside of the Sawtooth called Atlanta. And they kind of hiked out to the more popular side near Stanley and Redfish Lake. Because everyone drives up Idaho 21 and Idaho 75 and kind of all accesses the Sawtooths from kind of the northwest side of the range, but very, very few people on kind of the backside of the range, which is still equally beautiful. Now, everyone out there, you didn't hear this. You're not allowed to go there. I'm just kidding. You can go, but locals might not be happy. There's this little tiny mining community of Atlanta. I want to say population 20 or so. It's right on the backside of the Sawtooth, and it's a solid 2.5, 3 hour drive on dirt roads to even get to Atlanta on just some of the worst washboard you've ever driven. So make sure your gas tank is full and you've got a vehicle that can withstand some washboard.
Didn't they have the Summer Olympics there back in the early 90s?
Yeah, it's the other Atlanta.
The other Atlanta.
I always go up Highway 21, and especially if I'm with someone new that hasn't done Highway 21 before, I'll point out and be like, do you know there's a shortcut over to Atlanta right there? It's only 90 miles to Atlanta from here. And I go, wait, what?
Now, Detour, as we go through these hiking stories, I want you to feel free to share any moments. Because bad decisions always lead to the greatest stories.
Definitely.
So if you got any moments out there where you're thinking, oh my gosh, how did I get myself into this situation? We want to hear about that kind of stuff.
I'll share one from this hike. So we went into Atlanta on the backside, and I had done a ton of planning, and kind of early seasons, I was looking at satellite imagery to see where the snow was melting on the passes and see how much glissading we would have to do, or it would just be post holing up to our necks. What were we getting ourselves into? And I was actually really happy with the planning and preparation that I did there. And we came to this incredible route over 2 mountain passes through the Sawtooth and just connected these different basins together. And on our last day, as we were kind of coming down towards Redfish Lake, and the cool thing about Redfish Lake is kind of the grand finale of this is you can hike an extra 6 miles out to the kind of this lodge and parking lot, or this big long alpine lake you can take a shuttle boat across and take like a jet boat ride, and it's a heck of a way to end a trip. But before you get to the jet boat ride, you kind of are going along this creek as you start to kind of exit out through this just grand glacial valley. And there's this one spot where the water kind of starts to run over these slabs. And the slabs are pretty smooth, and the water is pretty gentle. Like there's a couple water slides on the JMT that are, you look at it like, that's absolutely crazy. It's quite a bit more gentle than that. However, it's not completely gentle. It's kind of, the water kind of splits to like a right-hand side and a left-hand side. And, we kind of were going down, just sliding down the right-hand side, having a lot of fun. And I mistakenly dared one of my friends to try the left-hand side. And, water's a lot more powerful than it looks. And thankfully my friend wasn't injured too badly, but, kind of slid down, hit a rock wrong, and kind of tumbled into the water. And, that water could be really, really swift. And that was like kind of a wake-up moment of, holy cow, like this doesn't mess around. And like, thankfully we're, about 3 miles out from the trailhead here, and we're basically done with this 4-day trip. But at the same time, yikes, like nature can be pretty unforgiving. So I think that was one kind of risk management wake-up call for me.
Okay. And was your buddy okay?
Yeah, he had to go to the chiropractor and whatnot and kind of get his back worked out. And I feel really bad about it, because it was kind of me that egged him on to go try it on the left-hand side. But thankfully he didn't break his spine or anything.
He had to get his chakras realigned.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Nice. Okay. And let's move on to Wyoming and the Wind River Range. We've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes with some former guests. And I always hear that the Wind River Range is very similar to the Sierras, except they're better. These people, they say that it's even a little bit more epic, a little bit more remote. And so I want to hear your take on the Wind River Range.
The Wind River Range is definitely out there, and there's a lot more that I want to experience in the Wind River Range. So I've just done this kind of one little mini through hike. So I hiked from the Green River Lakes Trailhead to Elkhart Park via the Knapsack Coal. And so basically there's a little shuttle company in Pinedale that'll take you from basically the Elkhart Park Trailhead up to the Green River Lakes Trailhead. I want to say it was $200-300 for the shuttle. And that allowed us to do basically as a little through hike. And I can't remember the exact mileage off the top of my head, but I want to say it was around a 40-mile little mini through hike. Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting. My perspective of the Wind River Range was that it was going to be this completely undiscovered vast wilderness, not a soul out there, like kind of like one of like the last true like undiscovered places. And I think some of that was influenced by reading a lot of the Knowles literature. You read the Knowles and you hear about, doing these 30-day expeditions out there, and it just sounds so remote, like something you might only outside of that find in Alaska or something. And it was definitely a shock for me to show up, and it was a zoo. There were just people on people on people.
Really?
You're constantly passing people on the trails. It was so busy. Okay. And it was just like, I didn't expect to see hardly anybody. And it was nonstop people, hard to find a legal campsite. Really, really challenging conditions in that sense.
More or less crowded than the John Muir Trail?
Depends on where on the John Muir Trail, but often more crowded.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And you mentioned that you went from Green River Lakes to Elkhart Park via the Knapsack Call. For our listeners out there who may not be familiar with that terminology, can you explain what a call is?
Yeah. So the way I always love to describe it is you have like basically a saddle, a pass, a col, and a notch. And those are in order of increasing difficulty. The way I like
one more time. Give us that order one more time.
A saddle, a pass, a col, and a notch. Okay. So in my kind of the way I think about it, like a saddle is like really chill. You could probably take your wagon over it. Like think about where like I-80 crosses the Continental Divide. Like it doesn't even look like much of a, pass. It's just like, it's like really gentle saddle. A pass is like any of the ones on the John Muir Trail, except for maybe Forester. Like Forester's like a lot of engineering went into that. But, most of your passes on the John Muir Trail, you kind of come through, kind of a rise, like you're crossing from one basin to another, but it's pretty big and open. A col is quite a bit tighter. Maybe you're kind of scrambling up there. We're talking second, maybe even third class climbing. Whereas a notch is like narrow. It's like a little, spot maybe between a serrated, knife mountains, and you might be doing full blown rock climbing to go, over a notch. So this was a col. The trail kind of peters out, and you hike about another mile up, and again, I didn't expect to see a single soul up here, and there's no trail. It's all kind of this kind of difficult second class climbing up the side of this, towards this little col in the rock. So, an opening between two peaks. And sure enough, there's like, probably 24 people out here. We're 15 plus miles from the trailhead, off trail, hiking up towards this col in the rock and on second class on the trail. And there's 15, 20 people out there also doing it. Anyway, so you hike up there, you reach this beautiful, beautiful spot where you can look into both basins, and you look down, there's a glacier that you actually go down a ways. And then you kind of hike out down and you come to the top of what's called the Titcomb Basin, which is a big destination for a lot of people in the river range, but they all kind of come up through the bottom. And instead, you kind of pop out at the top of the Titcomb Basin and get to come down through the Titcomb Basin and then eventually out to Elkhart Park, kind of via the more popular trails there. So I would highly recommend that route for anyone, but definitely do it later in the season, as you probably would need an ice axe or even potentially some rope to make like a snowball or to safely navigate the cornice on the east side of that col as you come onto the glacier.
Mm-hmm. And have you had any training in those areas? In mountaineering?
For glacier travel?
Yeah, glacier travel.
Not a ton of formal training. This glacier, it's one of those glaciers that's, it's practically a snowfield by now. It's still a glacier. I didn't go over towards the right-hand side of the glacier. There was what looks like there could be, perhaps one or two small crevasses over there. But the main route is very well traveled and does not have much hazard to it based on the research that I was doing. But, I don't have kind of formal glacier travel experience. It's nothing like, the side of Mount Rainier or something with one slip and, you're completely in some, giant thing or going or hanging serac. Here it's, it's very gentle to say that takes you just gently down into a flat area. It's very forgiving.
Got it. And I have here that in your time in the Wind River Range, that kind of lit your fire for long distance hiking.
Definitely. Kind of doing that mini through hike and seeing a couple CDTers out there. I was like, okay, This is pretty sweet. I want more of this. I want to figure out to do this with a lighter pack. I also might want to go solo and, kind of do this at my own pace and go faster.
Now, Detour, that there are a lot of people that listen to this podcast who love the outdoors and they love talking about through hiking. They love doing through hiking, but there might be an occasional listener who tunes in and thinks, why? What is the allure of through hiking? What is the allure of living in dirt and pooping in the outdoors and carrying everything on your back? That doesn't sound like fun. Can you share a little bit about, what is the allure of through hiking?
It's the holistic experience. I don't think it's any one part, because there are some really low points, as we'll touch on here soon. But there's also these just euphoric highs, but it's not the euphoric highs either. It's the entire experience. I think I'm actually going to explain it best through the same experience of backcountry skiing, actually. In backcountry skiing, you put in a lot of effort, right? You've got to plan for the avalanche conditions. You've got to dig pits. You've got to dig more pits, the hand pits. You've got to skin all the way up. You've got to read the weather. You might have to turn around. All of that, and then you get just a few minutes at best of just, phenomenal skiing, right? You can't do it just for those euphoric high moments of, those couple of moments of skiing. Same thing goes for, the John Muir Trail. You can't do it just for those kind of mountain pass moments. It's about, not just embracing the suck. That's a big part of it. It's the holistic experience. It's the planning. It's the preparation. It's the storytelling afterwards. And it's all of those pieces put together. And the way you just get immersed in that and the culture of it, that is unlike anything else.
That is an excellent description. Yeah, because I've often said that it's hours of torture interspersed with moments of just sublime beauty. But it's more
Precisely.
than that. It's not, it's like you said, it's not just those mountain pass moments. It is everything else. I also like to lump in there the power of incremental progress.
Yep.
And looking back at the end of a day and knowing that you started on the other side of that mountain pass over there, that is off way in the distance, and you did that on your own. You did that on foot power. There's no bus, there's no shuttle, there's no train or anything. You got from here to there and did it on your own. And
oh my goodness,
it is such a confidence builder. It is so satisfying.
It's so tangible too. Like, there's few things in life that are that tangible and where you can say like, yes, like I did that, and like no one else did that. No one else carried my pack. No one else carried me. Like I did that, especially after I, exited the trail and I was in, driving from Lone Pine back up 395, towards Idaho. And, you got the whole Sierra going by on your left. You see all the signs for the different trailheads. You're like, oh, Bishop Pass. You're like, wow, I remember Bishop Pass. That was like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or whatever. And you're like, wow, oh, there's the turn off for, for Yosemite. Wow, that was, however many weeks ago, whatever. You're like, holy cow, here I am driving. This is not a short drive, and like all this is going by me. Holy cow, that is so tangible, that progress.
Yeah. This summer I did the southern half of the John Muir Trail. Basically drove up on the west side of the Sierras, up to Fresno, kind of make a right-hand turn into the Sierras and drive up to
so like Trails End or
these mountain roads take you to Florence Lake, which is near Muir Trail Ranch, right? And so we started there and hiked south. And I remember on the final day coming down off of Whitney, heading into Whitney Portal, and the people who all smell good who are out on a day hiking up, and they would see my shoe was falling apart at that point, and I look pretty grungy, and people are asking, hey, where'd you start? And I just got so much joy out of telling them, yeah, I started near Fresno. And then the double take on their face, like, what? You walked from Fresno to here? I'm like, yeah, and they just can't believe it.
Oh, I love that moment too. I'm not one that's in it, for the recognition of others, but you can revel in that a little bit sometimes. And people be like, oh, where you come from? Where'd you camp? And they'd all think you're kind of one of those camps, people that are kind of doing an advanced base camp before summiting Whitney. I'm like, oh yeah. Last night I was in Guitar Lake, but originally coming from Yosemite Valley, and they're like, Yosemite Valley, whoa! So it's quite it's honestly a good feeling. You get a little affirmation there.
Yeah. Now I understand you've also done some time in Utah with some desert hiking. Look at this resume: Idaho, Wyoming, Utah. These are the spots to do some hiking.
Yeah, everything but the East. It is kind of an ironic place to do a shakedown for an alpine hike. I kind of did a little bit of a shakedown for the JMT this spring down in Coyote Gulch in Utah, which was really cool. My first time really doing desert hiking, which it's actually quite a bit harder to navigate when you're not in a canyon. Once you get in the canyon, it's pretty easy. You just follow the water, and it'd be pretty hard to get lost. But something interesting about Coyote Gulch is you have to do actually a couple miles of overland navigation to get to your spot to drop in the canyon, as well as after you exit the canyon at a different point to get back to where you parked your vehicle. So we're really having to rely on a lot of compass skills and map skills there, which was really, really cool. And just, that everything drops down instead of rising up. In the Sierra, everything rises up around you. And even when you're at any of the passes on the Sierra or in the Sierra, the mountains still rise up around you. but in the Coyote Gulch, with the exception of some distant, kind of mesas and whatnot, you're kind of the high point often until you drop down into the canyons, which is really cool. So I really enjoyed Coyote Gulch. I'd recommend it to anyone, except that road getting in there is pretty heinous, 50 miles of washboard each way to get in there. But it's certainly worth it. You kind of are in this. You could define it as a barren wasteland. It has its own beauty to it, but you're this very kind of stark desert up top, and then you descend down, and you're like this lush oasis, and you just realize how vital water is to kind of life in the desert. And you just follow this ribbon, and I wore sandals and just walked through the water rather than hiking boots, and it was a wonderful experience to just kind of walk through the water and see these unbelievable arches and sandstone formations. And then the exit out is really cool because it's actually pretty steep. Some say fourth class, some say third class, but it's kind of this tricky little exit out that actually adds a lot of excitement to it. And we rigged a fixed line for that to exit.
Okay. Hey, a quick hiking poll, and I spell poll this way: Poll, not POLE. Nice play on words there. Hiking
I like
poll.
it.
Because I just heard what you mentioned. Trail runners or boots?
Trail runners.
Okay.
So
you mentioned boots.
Yep.
When you're not in your boots, you're in your sandals.
Yep. Well, prior to the JMT, I definitely wore boots, and I still have a pair of boots lying around. And I think there's a couple. There's times and places that boots are nice. If I'm going to do something with a lot of scree where I don't need my approach shoes, I'll wear boots because they handle the scree really nicely. So a few of the 14ers in Colorado, I'll actually wear boots of them because they just keep all the little scree and dirt out pretty well, and provide some level of support, even though I think my trail runners have plenty of support. And then doing more technical things, I'll wear my approach shoes. There's more third and fourth class climbing. But yeah, so for the John Muir Trail and for Coyote Gulch, Coyote Gulch was a combination of sandals and trail runners, and the John Muir Trail was all trail runners, and I did the La Sportiva Bushidos.
Okay, very good. I was going to ask what brand. Very nice.
Yep.
All right. Now, without further ado, our listeners have been tuned in. They've been waiting for this moment. Let's get to the John Muir Trail and the weather that you encountered there. So tell us about this. Go ahead.
Yeah. So most severe weather in the Sierra occurs when you get pinched off monsoonal moisture. So think your classic Colorado summer thunderstorm. You have monsoonal moisture piping up through Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, into Colorado. Occasionally, based on how the jet stream is, a portion of that moisture can get pinched off and move up over the Sierra, and you'll get, afternoon thunderstorms, which can be, pretty troublesome. Something very, very strange happened in late June of 2021 due to the massive heat wave that most of the Western United States was experiencing. That created this large bubble of hot air. And that actually completely altered the atmospheric currents. And this really wet, moist air came down out of Canada over the Pacific Ocean and up into the Sierra, where it promptly collided with that hot air. So you had the high elevation, high moisture, and hot air, which was really a combination for just downright horrible weather. Really, what I don't have official data on him, but I think this could be some close to record bad weather. So the first night wasn't bad at all. So this was actually my very first night, Little Yosemite Valley. There was a little thunderstorm in the distance. Maybe got a couple drops of rain. Wasn't worried about it. I thought everything was fine. Day two. Actually, even though I ended up summiting a peak in the evolution basin that had a day that ended up having more elevation gain, this day actually had the most planned elevation of the trip to go up Clouds Rest. That's a good 4,000 feet climbing. I was going to go up Clouds Rest and then over to the Sunrise Lakes for the night. So climbed up Clouds Rest and, still had, I think at that point, a 6-day food carry to get me to Red's Meadow. So, and, definitely didn't have any sort of trail legs. And so I was feeling it, and working pretty hard, and got up and really relaxed at the top of Clouds Rest. And I want to say I got up at the top of Clouds Rest, around maybe 9, 10 a.m., pretty early. And not long later, I was like, wow, there are some pretty big cumulus clouds starting to build in the distance. And I'm like, wow, those are awfully big. They're not just, for 9, 10 a.m., those aren't just puffy little cumulus clouds. Those cumulus clouds are starting to tower. They clearly have convection in them, and they're getting pretty tall. And they were substantially out to the east, kind of look near the edge of where Yosemite National Park, turns into Ansel Adams or the John Muir Wilderness out there. So, but I'm watching these clouds, looking out of Yosemite Valley, taking my sweet time, eating an early lunch. And sure enough, I want to say, like, I don't know, maybe 11 a.m., one of these clouds starts to glaciate, which is where you have the supercooled water droplets that have been thrust up into the atmosphere by upwelling. And then they finally start to crystallize because they're so super cooled, and then they rapidly crystallize. And that's the moment that it crosses from being a cumulus cloud to a cumulonimbus cloud. And then at that point, the cloud has the propensity for thunder, lightning, and that those ice crystals begin to precipitate down and out, and will either be carried back up and form hail as they go up and down, or fall to the earth as rain, as those ice crystals grow and precipitate out of the cloud, because they don't have the buoyancy to stay up unless there's a really strong updraft, which later in the day we certainly got. So that was a pretty big red flag for me that you had cumulonimbus clouds, thunderstorms at 11 in the morning, which in my mind that shouldn't happen until 2 at the earliest, and here I am on top of Clouds Rest, this really, really exposed point. And not to mention, it was hot. I think Clouds Rest is maybe pushing 8,000-9,000 feet, and I think it was in the 80s. I was cooking, sweating. So I boogied it down off of Clouds Rest towards the Sunrise Lakes, and I'm telling some of the people, it's a pretty popular long day hike to get up there, and the sky is filling with clouds, and it's getting pretty dark. And I'm telling people, hey, maybe you don't want to go up there. It doesn't look good, And some people are, I don't know, it's hard to know what people did, but I was more focused on getting on to my destination. And I actually was starting to hear a little thunder in the distance, and the sky is real dark, but I actually made it down to the Sunrise Lakes, which was probably another, 4 miles or so. And I kind of got started setting up my tent, and I was far more concerned about the mosquitoes actually than the thunderstorm, really. They were just after me. And so it ended up actually being kind of a blessing. I set up my tent really haphazardly. I have one of those, so the REI Flash Air 2 does not have poles. It's a non-freestanding tent. You need to get the stakes out at the perfect angles. And I just had it really haphazardly set up, so I'm just constantly, slapping these mosquitoes. And all of a sudden, there's this ridge about a half mile away, up kind of above kind of the middle Sunrise Lakes. And a tree on that ridge gets absolutely drilled with lightning. And it's just like a 1/1000, 2/1000, boom! And I'm like, oh, wow, that's properly close. So I kind of step back, and suddenly the mosquitoes didn't matter. And I look around at the phenomenal tent spot I chose, and I look around, there's like 2 trees near my tent, and they both have these giant, gorgeous lightning sparks just spiraling around both of them. I'm like, well, I chose excellently for my tent pad. And so I'm probably like 75 yards from the trail and maybe 150 yards, 200 yards from the lake. So I kind of went halfway in between my tent and the lake, where there's a bit more uniform tree cover. And I went down there and just kind of sat down on my bare vault, thinking that was probably a pretty good insulator from the ground, and just try to find where the trees were the most uniform. And so the storm kind of came up, and I just got to that point where it was just like nonstop, like it never stopped thundering. Just, I've seen some pretty good thunderstorms, but, just be, one rumble would not fade out until the next rumble, just rumble and rumble and rumble. Rained for a little while, and the hail started up pretty quickly, and it wasn't too big of hail. It was around pea-sized hail. And then the lightning really picked up, and it was just like a lot of like flash, bang, flash, like really quick. It was just flashing right around. You're just like right in the thick of it. And I could still kind of see out towards the lake through the trees, and all of a sudden, I start seeing these massive splashes on the lake, and there's just like something's like impacting the lake and it's throwing water up like pretty high in the air, and it's like working like just all these like giant splashes in the lake, and it's working way toward me. I'm like, oh no, I know what that is. That's hail, and it's already hailing, and the lake's whipped up, but there's just these gigantic splashes in the lake now, and I'm like, oh no. And so I just tried to kind of put my kind of hands over my neck, and the hailstones got up to about the size of quarters. And they were drilling down. And I eventually got pretty big bruises on my shoulder and kind of like all around from these hailstones. And they were just, probably still 90% of the hailstones were the kind of small pea-sized ones. About 10% of the hailstones mixed in were just these absolute monsters that just, at that point, they don't really sting anymore. They just hurt. Like it just kind of feels like you're getting punched by the sky. And so I got off my bare vault, and I tried to kind of get my shoulder underneath this rock, and like, I don't know, I'm still getting just kind of drilled, and like, and at this one moment, I actually didn't have my hands behind my neck. I kind of had my hands out in front of me. And first I saw the flash kind of came first. Like everything just kind of was like instantly white. And then I kind of felt like this light, like this kind of surge into me, like everything kind of like it kind of yanked and kind of jolted me a little bit. And then the loudest like sound you can fathom, like it's so loud that like my ears didn't even really process it. They're just like so loud you can't really comprehend it. And then so the light kind of faded out. And when you look at the sun a little bit too long, you kind of get like that spot in your eyes. I kind of had something like that, kind of a weird line through my vision. And my ears are just ringing and ringing and ringing. And then all of a sudden, I realized I can't really move my hands. Like I realized that like my hands are kind of a little twitchy. And I'm like, they're not cold. Like they were cold, but like this is not just like cold. And I tried to make fists, and I couldn't make my hands make fists, and they just would kind of twitch. And like I tried to kind of feel my hands, and it was kind of like that pins and needles sensation, like when you fall asleep on your hand. And it was a little bit in all of my extremities, but mostly my hands, and they were just kind of freaking out. And I just kind of waited out. The hail went back to about pea-sized from the quarter size. The quarter-sized hail probably only lasted about 15 minutes through like the most intense part of the storm, and the lightning started to kind of move away a little bit, and I slowly regained full motor control of my hands. And I'm pretty sure it was a tree just about 50 feet away from what I can tell. And I was just like really glad to be okay. I've always had a healthy respect for thunderstorms. I'm not the guy out on the ridge like, bring it on, come on, show me what you got. I've always been like pretty responsible around, severe weather. I understand that, lightning is not something to mess around with, and I try to do my best in getting uniform tree cover. I'm just, really, really thankful to be alive and to be okay. Lightning, I'm aware that later this summer on the John Muir Trail, there actually was a fatal lightning incident down in the area of Muir Trail Ranch, which is heartbreaking, and my heart goes out to everyone involved there, and family and friends. And it really is scary, knowing that happened to someone, and what my experience was. And technically after an experience like that, you're probably supposed to go get checked out at a hospital or something. But I didn't. I felt pretty fine. I mean, obviously a little shaken up and a little scared and a little cold. Cause your rain jacket only does so much when you just get hit with that much hail. And, so it's still hailing, but most of the lightning had moved on. And so I kind of went up to where my tent was. And the fact that those mosquitoes had been after me actually ended up being kind of a blessing, because I had sent up haphazardly. So the hail had actually collapsed my tent. And so, because I was sure my tent was going to be tattered, it was just going to be giant, holes through it. And if I'd had a freestanding tent, it probably would have been, shredded. But because I set the tent up haphazardly, it was covered in it was under 2-3 inches of hail. So I was able to kind of shovel it out and get it set up and get inside my tent. Now, most mountain storms I'm used to, it kind of looks dark and stormy. The clouds, look good, whatever. Rains for 5-10 minutes, hails for 5-10, rains for maybe another 15, a little windy, and then the storm moves on, right? Life's good. These storms were unlike anything I've experienced before. So by this point, it already was an hour into this hailstorm by the time I went up back to my tent, and it hailed for 3 hours straight and continued to rain for another 4. So it hailed and rained all the way until sunset. Everything was soaked. So, I mean, these storms were just some of the most intense I have ever seen. And this was really just the start.
Wow. What an experience. And I know the incident you're talking about with the poor guy who passed away from a lightning strike. I was in that spot the day before. So it happened the day after I was there. And what an experience. I mean, that is frightening. That is scary. Yeah. That is epic that you were that close and lived to tell about it. And just and you never would have thought you'd have heard yourself saying, thank goodness for the mosquitoes.
Never.
It saved your tent.
Never thought I would have said that. Yeah. Just praise the Lord. Just really, really thankful to be alive and to kind of retell that and and tell other people. It's lightning is serious, and you gotta take precautions. Mm-hmm. So that was just the start, believe it or not. That kind of weather pattern repeated itself the next 2 nights. So I got to Tuolumne Meadows, and sure enough, it hailed for 3 hours straight and rained for another 4 until sundown. And plenty of close and scary lightning. The lightning wasn't quite as bad that night. And thankfully, didn't have any that close. But, people were starting to get, pretty freaked out and going, the weather on my Garmin says, 5%, this is certainly more than 5% chance of precipitation. I think this event was so bizarre with this moisture coming out of Canada that I think a lot of the forecast modeling were just like struggling to kind of comprehend what it is. And when you had that hot air and the moisture in the high Sierra, it was just this terrible mix. So the third night, got up to kind of the first footbridge before, as you're kind of heading up in upper Lyell Canyon, still kind of in the sub-alpine, but as you start to really climb up there, and and also starting early, starting at 4 or 5 in the morning, starting in the dark, looking it out there. And something that also caught my attention that day heading out was you kind of come up along the Tuolumne River for just a mile or so, and I had been at the Tuolumne River about a week before, and it had been this like placid little gentle streams. It's like the summer with no snow, right? So the river was a fraction of what it should be, and it was like this dainty little stream, practically, much not the mighty Tuolumne River. Well, let me tell you, on this day, the Tuolumne River was gushing. And I looked at some data after the fact, and it was gushing even more than I thought. From the week before to then, there was 7 times more water in the Tuolumne River. And it wasn't just the Tuolumne. I mean, there were areas the trail was washed out, and there were massive hail flows filling up the trail. I'm sure some of the trail crews, huge shout out to anyone out there involved in trail work. That's hard work, respect, because I know a few trails were really damaged in these storms in the Yosemite area and probably beyond, with some flash flooding that occurred and hail flows as well. But regardless, I digress. So I got up to the upper Lyle Fork, got my tent set up, and try to get the absolute perfect pitch and figure, okay, how would the water run? How would the hail melt? And by this point, you're kind of a little scarred, like your whole focus kind of narrowed. It was like, honestly, it was a little bit more of a survival perspective at that point than, really enjoying the experience. I'll be honest. Like it was getting pretty serious. And you're kind of getting to this point of like, I don't know how many more days I can do this. Like it's taking everything I can to hike as fast as I can to try to still make my mileage. And I wasn't shooting for long mileage by any means. I was kind of taking the slow boat, John Muir Trail, right? And it's taking everything I can to pack up first thing, everything wet, take a ways, eat a really quick lunch and try to dry some stuff out, get up to my campsite and get the perfect pitch and hopefully a spot that won't become a lake or a river, and then weather this storm, right? And that was kind of like what I knew I was in for that day. And sure enough, about 2:00, the hail and lightning and rain started up, and you're in your tent. And thankfully, I brought this 2-person tent because you're spending 8 hours a day. Well, actually, no, if you count sleeping, you're spending 16 hours a day in your tent, right? You're confined to your little 3x6 rectangle. And I was sure happy to have a 2-person tent there. And still you got to get, if it's hailing for 3 hours, you have to get out every few minutes with your little poop shovel to dig out the hail so the tent doesn't collapse. And you're constantly, and you can't just like sit there and read your book. You're constantly like pushing the hail off the tent so the tent doesn't collapse, and praying that, something doesn't break. That, your trekking pole doesn't flex too much from the weight of it. And even the best spots, you look at the spot, and by the 3rd day, you can see where the hail and the rain has been. You think you choose a good spot, but even the best spot still has these just rivulets of water coming down, and, the hail piles up on that last day of storms, the 3rd day. The hail piled up 3 to 4 inches deep in a lot of places, and like where it ran off my tent. I mean, it was 8-9 inches deep of hail that I was shoveling out with my shovel. And I recognize that it's not best to dig channels in the dirt that can alter the way water drains and kind of the micro ecosystem. But I kind of had to do it in a few spots because I was going to be in a lake, and the next morning I would kind of smooth out those trenches and try to make it look like I hadn't kind of changed the way the water runs off. But it was going to potentially actually become like a serious hazard, a threat to not kind of mitigate the runoff there. So on the morning after that 3rd storm, there was family that I had kind of been hiking along with. They were great, the Gawthorns, and I had kind of become almost like an extended member of their family. And they were going to do a good bit of the JMT, not the whole thing, as a family. They had these big Marmot Limelight 3-person tents. They were packing pretty heavy as a family. They had like those big, like classic, like MSR white gas stoves and everything. And they're like, we came out here with 3-season tents, and this is 4-season conditions. I mean, this is real. And so they actually turned back. And I don't blame them. And I know a lot of people that turned back because for all we know, everything, the weather app said, hey, there's 5 to 15% chance of thunderstorms. And everything we knew for 5 to 15% was all hell's going to break loose here in about 8 hours. And, we got to get over Donahue Pass. And, I seriously considered, I was like, I have planned for this for months. I have put a lot of money and time and my identity into this. Like, should I give up? I really considered it, and that was kind of a low point. But I was like, I've done it for this many days. I can go one more at least. Like I can go one more. And so I got up at about 4 a.m, packed up as quickly as I could, and started my way towards Donahue Pass. That's where I met Pepe Le Pew and his hiking partner. Traded stories, and the trail was completely iced over. A lot of places the trail was flooded or had water running over it. It looked like fall conditions, like hiking in fall snow or something. And it was slippery and icy, and a few of the water crossings that normally would be rock hops were full blown wades and just icy cold, 4 a.m. water. It was tricky. Got over Donahue Pass, and the clouds were starting to build behind me, and I boogied on down to Thousand Island Lake. And sure enough, I looked back towards Donahue Pass. It looked like a thunderstorm over there, but so all praise be to God, the storm did not form over Thousand Island Lake. And I actually got a sunburn that day, and I could not have been happier. The best sunburn I have ever gotten in my entire life.
That's fantastic. IB Tat, he's a long trailer out there who just got off the CDT. I talked to him last year was it his AT or his PCT hike? Maybe it was his AT hike. And his piece of advice was never quit on a bad day. Never quit. Never let the trail make you quit. Always quit on your own terms when the reasons are right. But don't be discouraged. Keep plugging away, persist, that kind of thing. I think that's some pretty good advice, and that seems to be the attitude you took as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's definitely some times where maybe risk management. If you're going to be in a really dangerous situation, but the reality is I had done my research. I knew that there was, again, I could find some limited tree cover around Thousand Island Lake or even a hair beyond if I had to. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I was able to dry my gear out a little bit. I wasn't in danger of hypothermia or anything. So really it was my mental grit. Was the only thing holding me back. And so I'm glad I pushed on. But the reality is that wasn't the last of severe weather. That big event with that Canadian moisture was done, but there were 2 more events of monsoonal moisture, actually. So Evolution Lake had a terrible hailstorm going over Muir Pass, had a challenging thunderstorm. Day after that, got absolutely hailed to death at Palisade Lakes. So 3 more days of hail.
Wow.
Then to top it all off, the creme de la creme, the last 2 days of the trail were very eventful as far as weather goes. So second to last night, camped at Bighorn Plateau, which I would recommend to anyone. Just a stunning spot. I will say, I expected the most challenging place to set up my non-freestanding tent to be somewhere really rocky, like on a rock slab. No, Bighorn Plateau is by far the hardest because that soil is really sandy, and I couldn't get the stakes to hold. And it was a little breezy. It's really exposed up there in the Bighorn Plateau. Yep. So it was a nightmare trying to get the stakes in the ground in the Bighorn Plateau and get my tent pitched. I'll just put that out there. So go to the Bighorn Plateau. Do it if you have a freestanding tent or a lot of patience. Got up the next morning, and the sky just looked really, really threatening. At 8 a.m., I think. No, even before that, it must have been around 6 or 7, whatever time sunrise is. Getting out of the tent and the way down to the south, past the John Muir Trail, probably even past the Cottonwood Lakes area. I could already see a full blown thunderstorm, glaciated on top and producing lightning at 7 a.m. I'm like, well, this doesn't bode well. So hiked through the rain up to Crabtree Meadows, where everyone, kind of this whole kind of trail family and people that I knew and people I didn't know, we all just kind of hunkered down there because that still had a good bit of tree cover. And really one of the biggest blessings was my father is a meteorologist for the National Weather Service. And so I actually don't have a Garmin. I have another brand called the Somewhere device, which I would highly recommend to anyone. If I could give a second must-bring gear review, it would be the Somewhere satellite communicator. It's a phenomenal device, and I was sending some pretty detailed paragraphs back and forth between my father and I, and he was able to give me some just way more detailed weather information than you can get on your Garmin, or kind of just that basic weather that you can pull on any of those devices. And he was telling me, the weather's marginal, but it looks like you might have a window. And a lot of people were saying, golly, I was planning to exit the trail tomorrow, but perhaps going to wait it out another day. So right around an hour before sundown, the storms kind of moved off and continued up to Guitar Lake, and it was ominous. I mean, there were low clouds hanging over all the mountains. I mean, Whitney was like kind of draped. I mean, it was one of the most dramatic scenes I've ever seen. I mean, just this like richness and depth to kind of this glowing sunset, and the air was just really kind of wet and heavy. And it was foreboding. It was ominous. Here you are at the base of Mount Whitney, and that there's a lot of kind of lightning risk and whatnot. And but you're planning to go up there the next day. And so I went to bed. I'm like, well, it's the last night. It should be pretty clear, not 100%, but I'm tired. Everything's wet. I don't really want to pitch my tent. I'm in a cowboy camp for the last night. It's the only night of the whole trail I'm in a cowboy camp. And so sure enough, around 11 p.m., I feel something kind of wet in my face. I'm like, what could that be? And sure enough, I kind of wake up, and it's kind of pitter patter. It's really light rain. I'm like, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. And I'm like, it'll let up. It'll stop. And no, it didn't. So, forced myself to get out of my sleeping bag. So like, this down's going to get soaked in a heartbeat. If I'm not careful, I need to address this. I'm like, I am freezing cold. I'm not about to go pitch my entire tent here. It's like super rocky. Like this would be probably a 20-minute ordeal to get the tent properly set up here. So I just grabbed the tent, pulled it over me like a big old blanket, and just used the tent as a blanket. And it just kind of, it rained for about an hour or so, or an hour and a half, until my alarm went off at 1:45 in the morning. It was my time to start hiking to my Whitney summit bed. And so everything was soaked. But at this point, I didn't really care, because I knew I was exiting the trail. Like earlier on, those first storms I described, I was religious about keeping things dry. At this point, I didn't care. Like pack my backpack haphazardly. My bear vault's almost empty, so I'm throwing like all sorts of stuff. I think my sleeping pad was in my bear vault. Just get it in there and let's get going. And so I'm hiking up, the backside of Whitney there as you start to climb towards Trail Crest there. And I knew that basically from the weather information I had that the storm's moving due north. Okay. And so it's 2 a.m, and there were 3 lightning storms at 2 a.m. There was one to my north that I wasn't worried about at all. I think that was the one that it rained on a little bit, and it's flashing lightning and throwing bolts. And there was one to my southwest and one to my southeast. And it's really hard at night, especially to tell how far out they are. So it's like, are those storms going to move to my west and to my east, or are they going to move right towards me? And I earnestly didn't know. And my hope was that I could get up to kind of that ridge, the first of those kind of notches, and get a little bit of cell signal actually, and be able to look at the radar loop and see exactly where those storms were. And so I'm, trucking it up the backside of Whitney in the middle of the night with my headlamp. And normally I understand it's a pretty busy affair, of people kind of hiking up in the night in the dark.
You're probably the only guy out there.
Yeah, exactly. People were freaked out about the weather. I was the only one on the mountain. So I get up to that, I kind of stash my bear vault with a few heavy things at kind of the junction there. I get up to that first window, and there's no cell service. And I'm like, okay. And I kind of had this moment, I'm like, this is definitely risky. I've already had one lightning experience here, but those storms are to my southwest and my southeast. But I have come so far to get to this point, to accomplish this mountain. It's been just looming there. It is such a tangible goal. Like, I'm going to make it. Even if I just like touch that summit and turn around and book it down, I'm going to make it, is what I told myself. And, thank goodness to hiking south and really good acclimatization, I was able to run to the top. I was able to jog the whole way, jog and run, except for a couple of those little bit more kind of tricky bits where there's kind of some detached blocks and stuff. But most of that trail is like a super highway. So I was able to just run up the trail with my headlamp on full blast. Got up to the summit, I think about, 4 or something in the morning. Entirely myself. I kind of expected somebody to be like sleeping up there in the shelter or something, but no, completely a ghost town, all myself. And I was able to get self-service, and sure enough, those storms were my southwest and my southeast. So I knew I had a little bit of time to spare. And so just got to watch a little bit of the sunrise. It was just spectacular up there. Normally, the sunrise at Whitney's like this big John Muir Trails tradition. I'm sure a lot of people on the podcast come on and say that's how they finish their hike. Nobody up there, all to myself. And I probably should have left the summit a few minutes earlier because sure enough, due to my south, the storm started to build up. And I eventually started to book it on down, and it started to snow on me at 14,000 feet. And I got over Trail Crest and started to go down, and all hell broke loose. Another really intense storm.
Holy smokes.
A lot of hail, a lot of lightning. I had someone that I know on the trail just about a mile behind me. There was a bolt of lightning that actually struck pretty much directly on the trail, almost exactly at Trail Crest, when I was not even more than probably a half mile past it. And I know somebody was up there, and he said his hair was all standing up and doing the whole thing. And just, that trail is those switchbacks are really carved there. But the engineers that built that trail didn't really think much about water runoff. So all that entire trail was just flooded on kind of down those 99 switchbacks, whatever. Yep. So at points, the water was ankle deep, freezing cold water. The hail is coming down, the lightning's everywhere. Got down a little bit, kind of where it levels out. And then all of a sudden, from kind of high on the right, I'm not exactly sure what mountain that is, but if you're kind of facing down the valley, down towards Whitney Portal, Mount Whitney's kind of up and behind you, up and to your left. The mountain kind of up on my right just released this gigantic rock slide. And I mean, it just came thundering down. Like I thought it was thunder at first, right? Because there's a bunch of thunder and lightning, but it had a different, more visceral rumble. And these blocks, I mean, there were a couple the size of the home, size of cars, and every size in between down to pebbles, and just this big chunk of mountain rolling down. And thankfully the trail is kind of up on kind of what I think might be a bit of a medial moraine there, because there's kind of low, kind of some low kind of areas on both sides of the trail. And so thankfully it wasn't near anybody or where it would hurt somebody. It just kind of, cascaded down into that low area in the base of kind of the valley off to the right there. I'm like, holy cow, well, that is definitely the Sierra's parting gift of great weather. But got down to the burger shack down there and devoured a burger in the pouring rain, and it was great. Best burger I've ever had.
Yes, I concur with that. Now you would look forward to this trip. I mean, this was kind of an epic moment for you. This is you're branching off from this 40-miler experience in the Wind River Range, and now you've got this 250 mile through hike planned, and you do it during probably the most challenging series of weather events that you could possibly encounter out there. So that had to be frustrating at times, but also at the end, looking back, extremely satisfying that you weathered the storms, literally.
Yep, absolutely. It feels really good. It's a great sense of accomplishment to push through that, not to skip a section, and just to stay strong. And I'm really thankful. It's without some challenge, it's it wouldn't be the same. And I'm just really thankful to have finished it without injury and with a smile on my face. Yeah,
a lot of type 2/type 3 fun out there.
Definitely some type 3 out there. I would even bargain maybe some type 4 at a few points.
Hey, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we're going to hear what's next for Detour. We're going to go through some of our closing segments, and I also want to hear about some highlights on the trail because we talked
Absolutely.
a lot about the challenging times, but I want to hear about some of the highlights. So stay tuned for that. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Talking to Detour. We have just heard some incredible moments from the trail, some challenging moments, incredible weather. And I have to tell you, you've really done a great job selling how awesome it is to be out there. I think there'll be a few less hikers out on the trail next year after listening to this episode. But I know that it's not all the doom and gloom and the challenge of the weather out there. There had to be some just awe-inspiring moments and just fantastic beauty out there. So we're gonna go with a top 5 list, the top 5 best moments from the JMT.
Absolutely.
And if you can kind of compress that down to about, 15, 20 seconds per moment, that would be perfect.
You got it. Some of those worst storms seem to have the best sunsets. So it was like this weird high and low. So you'd have terrible hailstorm, then a great, sunset. So like the sunset at S3E13 Lake after getting hailed on, just phenomenal. Getting on top of Mount Whitney, being the only one up there, that was magical. Up on top of Muir Hut during one of the storms, there were about 15 of us up there. We were all sharing stories. I was telling people about how weather works, how cloud glaciation happens, and this guy was playing his flute. I mean, it was like this really cool bonding moment. But one moment that really sticks out to me was actually at the Ray Lakes. I came across this family that was backpacking, and they were backpacking quite heavily. On the Ray Lakes, they actually chose to get mule resupply, believe it or not. And they had hammock, inflatable couches, and big tents. I mean, they really brought it all. They must have had 40, 50 pound packs. And I kind of enjoying talking to them. And they had just gotten that mule resupply in. Now, they had a few people bail on their trip, so they had a bunch of extra food. And so that night, I chowed on fresh fajitas and fresh brownies and like homemade salsa. I was in paradise. I mean, it was some of the greatest trail magic I have ever experienced. And so shout out to Heavy Innovator Gassy and all the folks up there at the Ray Lakes, because you seriously made my night. That was a high point.
Fantastic. That's trail magic right there.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Hey, Detour, you know where we are?
I would think maybe the pro tip insight of the week.
That is absolutely correct. What nugget of wisdom can you share with our listeners to make their next outdoor experience even better?
I would say get a wilderness first responder training. It's a little bit spendy, but I think it could come in, really handy. I chose to get my wilderness first responder training after witnessing a climbing accident in Idaho, where another party made a pretty serious mistake rappelling off the end of a rope. And after that, I chose to get my wilderness first responder, and it's really a great piece of education to have. I think education is something that you can take into the backcountry that doesn't weigh down your base weight at all. So go ahead and get your wilderness first responder.
That is an excellent recommendation. So there you have it. This episode is just about in the books. Hope our listeners enjoyed our time with Detour. I want to thank him for joining us this week. Detour, how can our listeners keep up with you on social media, and where can they find updates on your latest adventures?
I'm always on Instagram with my handle at GRANTBBACH. I'm always posting stories and adventures in Colorado. I'd also ask people to check out the Bear Vault social media at Bear Vault. We're always, posting fun giveaways, and information about bears and proper food storage. So check out those.
As part of the marketing team at Bear Vault, do you control their social media?
Oh yeah, I'm in there every single day.
Yeah, I noticed that Bear Vault started following me today.
Yeah, there's probably a reason.
All right. Remember to check out the pod on social media as well. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And if you have comments or clips you want to share, you can send it to me at johnfreakinmuir@gmail.com. Detour, I'm also looking to you to share a recommendation for a book, a movie, documentary, some kind of adventure media to keep our listeners connected to the trail. What do you have for us?
Totally. I found this YouTube channel called The Gear Skeptic. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, but he goes into, for some, probably excruciating detail about different topics like water filtration or basically packing your food. And something that he really dug into that was a game changer for me was really getting, calorically dense food. And I thought I knew what calorically dense food is before this hike. And I mean, he kind of rocked my world, and I really, really got into it. And it was something important because, like, I'm a skinny guy. I have almost no body fat, I'm 6 feet tall and 125 pounds. And, a lot of people go into these trails saying, hey, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'll be fine. And I'm going, I don't have 10 pounds to lose. Like, I will not make it if I lose 10 pounds. I can't just pad, that a pound of fat is 3,400 calories and hope for the best. I've got to get my food dialed in. So between his stuff and doing a lot of research, I built these incredible spreadsheets that listed out basically every calorie that I was planning to eat, and built this whole index of how difficult I thought the day was going to be, how many calories I thought I would need, and really getting a grasp on this idea between, balancing volumetric density with caloric density. And I mean, that really shook my world. And, I was comparing some of the foods that I would have eaten, previously backpacking to what I ate, on the John Muir Trail. And I did some math, and for my longest section from Muir Trail Ridge to like Independence Valley, Kearsarge Pass, I probably would have eaten another 10 pounds in food normally if it wasn't for what I learned from the Gear Skeptic. So it's some pretty lengthy videos. Expect some numbers, some math, but I think your food weight will thank you.
Okay, Gear Skeptic with some excruciating details. Very good. And before we wrap things up, I've got one more segment for you called What Have I Not Asked You That You're Dying to Tell Us About?
I just want to recap how important it is versus food storage is. And when you're on top of Kearsarge Pass and you're out of water, don't drink a double IPA because the way down will be very, very hard.
What could go wrong?
Who knows?
That is a wrap from the John Freaking Muir studio. Any shout outs to friends and family, Detour?
Just, really thankful to finish this whole thing without injury. I want to thank my folks for the ride down to California so I could start the hike. Huge shout out to my trail fam, Ed, Raquel, Danny, Aaron, Zach, Haley, and everyone else who I got to meet out there that, was a tramily in some large or small way. Y'all are awesome. So just thank you so much, and really, really wonderful to be on the podcast this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Always remember, the trail is the trail. It doesn't care if you want to go downhill. It doesn't care if it's almost dark and you're looking for a campsite. It doesn't even care if you're standing on your bare vault, being pelted with hail and dodging lightning. The trail is the trail. Embrace
Absolutely
the suck.